Hello, everybody, and welcome. Good evening to those of you who are here in this room, and also to those of you who are watching us live from Brussels. So this evening, what are we talking about? For the next hour and a quarter, we have one question clearly in mind. In the next few months, the European Commission will produce the European Oceans Pact. And that says very clearly it's going to look at three issues. It's going to look at how we affect the ocean, how the ocean affects coastal communities, and the opportunities that the ocean provides us with. So that's very clear. It's going to be a big vision that will bring together different fragmented pieces of policy, whether it's policy looking at fishing, whether it's looking at environment, cleanliness of the waters, and trade. All of those pieces happen at the moment in separation. So the EU Oceans Pact is going to bring it all together. And of course, it will be linked to the EU's other big issues around the Green Deal, around clean industry and others. But what's so important about marine transport? Why is that a big picture? Well, there's about 400 million passengers a year that move on a boat somewhere across our European waters. 74% of all EU and import happens on ships. We have some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. So if you're going to be thinking about a big vision for the oceans, maritime transport clearly has to be part of it. And it needs to be part of the ambitions for the kinds of change and our values, what we want to see happen. That's the energy transition. That's our goals to net zero. That's looking to see how we can improve efficiency of everything we do, including the use of AI and others. But we already have issues where we know that our oceans face significant pollution. And these are issues that we're going to discuss today. We're going to explore what is the role of maritime transport, what's its environmental impact, what can be done to mitigate where there are problems, how does that impact the vibrant economic activities that we see within port areas and our maritime spaces, not forgetting our coastal communities, our fishing communities, whose livelihood depends on that, and our tourism that's so connected to the sparkling blue waters around the EU. So that's what we're going to be talking about. For those of you who are on social media, we encourage you to use the hashtag FOE for Friends of Europe Debate. And let me just explain how we're going to do this. I'm going to start by having, instead of a fireside chat, I'm going to have a seaside chat. And I'm going to be speaking to Lene Ulla Moninen, the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency, the EEA. But I will also be joined remotely by Maja Markovic-Kostelak, the Executive Director of the European Maritime Safety Agency, EMSA. And when I said the seaside chat, we can show you this on screen. It genuinely is a beautiful view of the seas. So we're going to start with a conversation, a seaside chat, and then I'll have other panel members that I'll introduce to you. And of course, you will be able to interact. I will come to you physically in the room. It's analog. Hands up if you have a question. For those of you online, my colleague is there watching the community there. So if you've got questions, please put them there and we'll be able to deal with them. Right, so let's start. I'm going to ask both Lena and Maja the same question. I'll start with you, Lena, here. What are the main messages in the EMTA from your perspective? And let's start by just telling us, what is the EMTA?
We made a joint report, European Maritime Transport Environmental Report. It was launched a month ago in Lisbon with the great events there, with the beautiful seaside view like Maja has there. So it is really a fact-based report on looking at the both impacts and trends on the maritime sector. So quite comprehensive: greenhouse gas emissions, air and water pollution, microplastics, biodiversity impacts. So pretty much all where we have data at the moment. And I mean, if you ask me about what are the main messages of the reports, well, first of all, as you said it, I mean, the maritime sector is so really important for the economy of the EU. They drive trade, growth, jobs, economic development, and of course, we must balance this growth and these activities with environmental protection. And the report shows really quite well that we have, and the sector has made progress in many areas, like reducing sulfur oxide, SOx emissions to air, improving waste management, reducing marine litter, and reducing invasive alien species. So also showing how, broad spectrum of issues the report is covering. But there are also really persisting challenges. And I think Maija will elaborate more on the CO2, so the greenhouse gas emissions, NOx, so nitrogen oxide emissions, methane emissions, and also things like underwater noise. And then overall, this ballast water treatment management is still an issue. Seabed disturbances and collision of ships with marine life, like marine mammals. And of course, this sector is already in a transition towards sustainability. Many things have indeed, already been put on good track. And also these kind of transitions, there are both benefits and trade-offs. We know that. And these, I would say, rather uncertain geopolitical times, it is particularly important to understand these trade-offs and also then the benefits. And in line with the European Green Deal objectives, Zero Pollution Action Plan, Fit for 55 package, and with the climate neutrality target of the EU, the maritime sector also has to accelerate its decarbonization, adopt alternative fuels, reduce its impacts on marine biodiversity. And it is really also important that there's an enhancement of monitoring and enforcement of the regulations that we already have in place. And the forthcoming EU new initiatives like the Oceans Pact can give really a new boost towards sustainability. But it also requires, maybe new tools. So better use, for example, of the marine spatial planning and strategies for sustainability transition within the sector, marine and maritime sectors. So EMTER report also underscores the need for coordinated and global collaboration for sustainable transition. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. So it's good to hear that we've got some positive news in a range of different areas and other areas where the news is less positive and clearly a lot of work needs to happen. Maija, let me bring you in from your seaside there. From your perspective, what are the main messages that you want people to draw from the EMTER report?
First of all, good afternoon from Lisbon. It would be nice to join you in Brussels, but as we can see, the advantage of the technology is in place. And I would like to thank the Friends of Europe for organizing this event and giving us the opportunity to talk about the EMTER, one of the latest products by EMSA and EEA. And I would like to once again thank and applaud this good cooperation between the two agencies. Now, coming to your question, what are the main messages deriving from EMTER? I would start first with the one overall message, and that is that environmental footprint of maritime transport is improving, is getting better. And that would be the overall result or overall outcome of our report. Nevertheless, we have seen that there are a lot still to be done, although maritime transport, as we have heard, is still one of the most environmentally friendly mode of transport. Its contribution to the environmental and climate goals needs to be sped up. So there are some areas in which, like decarbonization, in which we are at the beginning. If I go a little bit into three topics, which are GHG emissions, air emissions, and underwater noise, then I would say that when it comes to CO2 emissions, we are still in the increasing curve, coming back to the pre-pandemic figures of 137.5 million tons of CO2 emitted from maritime transport, which makes it which gives us the portion of the 14% of all transport emission in the EU, or 3% of all CO2 emissions in EU totally. When it comes to methane, The picture is not very positive because we have seen the constant increase of the methane emission from maritime transport. However, the report is still based on modeling. Now, when the methane is a part of the extension of ETS, in our next edition of the report, we will be able to match it with the real reports on the emissions from the individual ships. When it comes to air emission, here the sounds, or coming back to the course, if we are talking about GHG still emissions, of course, decarbonization is the answer. And here we know that we are at the beginning of the process with, at the moment, 3% of the total tonnage globally running on the alternative fuels. Nevertheless, we do see the progress, we do see the trend in increasing number of the use of different sorts of alternatives, although industry has clearly signaled that the transition period is dedicated to the LNG or some source of hybrid. Nevertheless, we do see also very promising technology on zero carbon fuels in a progress in the development. Coming to the air pollution, SOx is a positive example with a decrease of over 70% in SOx control zones. NOx is not that positive, so we don't still see any decrease, quite contrary. We still reported a 10% of increase in NOx emissions. And even in the NOx control zones, which is Baltic and North Sea in Europe, progress is yet not to be seen. Since the NOx, of course, according to the IMO standards, the NOx regulations applies from the date to new ships, so from the date of the implementation of the standards in certain part of Europe. The final one I want to underline is the underwater radiated noise, because this is the first time that we have included in our report the underwater radiated noise. And again, based on the model, what we have seen is the constant increase in underwater radiated noise, particularly as expected in the areas of the more intensive maritime transport, and particularly in semi-enclosed sea areas or channels or straits. However, here interesting is the forecast, which shows that should we implement certain technical and operational methods, should we improve the standards relating to the shipbuilding and operation on board the shipping, and in combination with the implementation of some of GHG mitigating measures, the decrease could be very significant.
Thank you. So again, that mixture of kind of good news and bad news. Some significant reductions in SOx, but it's the methane, the greenhouse gases, the CO2 is going up. So clearly there's some areas that we need to sort of make some urgent efforts on. Lena, let me turn to you. Is there a way that by getting more sustainable practices in the maritime transport sector, we could, hit the two goals at the same time? So yes, we get an improved environmental profile, but would that also improve our competitiveness, which is the other key theme that we're all concerned about?
Short answer, yes. Let's start from the basics. I believe that stable climates and healthy environment is, of course, a bedrock of everything that we do, and well-being of our societies. So failure to reverse environmental degradation and climate change jeopardizes our way of life, and all the business and economic activities as well. So securing, good living standards and quality of life of also future generations, so having also sustainable businesses, will depend on how we act now on the environmental and climate crisis today, here and now. And of course, we have the European Green Deal and its ambitions, which we are also the political agenda at the moment is saying, staying true on. And staying the course for the longer term, I mean, not only for this political mandate, but really these are long-term objectives as well. And of course, this has potential to deliver sustainable prosperity, resilience to climate change and environmental health for all Europeans. And this is also true for the maritime sector. The challenges are no doubt, I mean, rather significant, but investing in more sustainable sector can also attract innovation in investments, create jobs, and ensure it's the sector's long-term future. That has to be, of course, the goal. And investing in cleaner fuels, smarter shipping, greener ports, of course, it comes with initial costs, but it will also bring economic benefits in the mid and long term, and reduce also, hopefully also, if we get the pricing right, operational costs rather short term, and make low emission transport more attractive also worldwide. So this front runner effect is also an important consideration. And of course, support from public EU and other funding, carbon pricing, trade policies, they can also help cover these green investments and keep European shipping industry competitive. And of course, we have to also work together with our global partners, organizations, which can push really this green shipping to become, let's say, a new industry standard. And as said, these investments can also create jobs and business opportunities, while also protecting at the same time marine ecosystems so that they stay healthy and productive, and we can fish and enjoy the sea views also in the future. And in the longer run, of course, making sustainability a priority will give the EU a competitive strength, we believe. Thanks.
Thank you. So there's clearly some quite large capital investments that need to be made. I mean, this isn't like just choosing to have an electric car rather than a combustion car. They, these are major, big, investments, large ships, large ports. So it's going to take time and significant investments. Okay, Maya, let me move to you now. So what is EMSA doing to support the transition towards greener and more sustainable shipping? Lena spoke about the importance of greening our shipping fleet. We're already bringing 3/4 of the stuff that comes in and out of Europe comes by ship. So it is, in theory, it's the greener version of moving things around with freight than bringing it in by air. But what can we do to make it even more green, or more sustainable?
Well, EMSA's engagement in different sustainability-related topics are constantly increasing in last year for the obvious reasons. So what we are doing in concrete, on one hand side, we are trying to fill the gaps in knowledge so that we support decision makers in the rational decision when it comes to sustainability policy. In concrete, for example, EMTER is one of the examples, but certainly our studies on alternative fuels and their potentials in the use in maritime transport, including the series of studies dedicated to the safety aspects of different alternative fuels, which is our core business, let's put it that way. And when we identified different new risks associated with the use of potential alternative fuels, we are also working with other institutions, Commission, and our industry partners in addressing it through appropriate guidances. We are also supporting, of course, the Commission in the deliberation in the IMO arena. But we have also the full portfolio of operational activities. Since the beginning of EMSA 22 years ago, we are constantly building our capacities for pollution response, with which we are supporting and topping up the capacities of the member states. We have 16 vessels chartered and placed around Europe. We have 6 stockpiles. They're all equipped with drones to support the pollution response in the case that it is needed. But we are also supporting the measurement of the air emission with our drones and payloads on the demand and the request of the member states. We are using Earth observations of the satellite images to identify the potential pollution in the sea domain, maritime domain. And this is, of course, connected with the early warning, which enables the member states to act and react when this is needed. And finally, we are developing the state-of-art digital tools, also in the support of sustainability agenda. Just one example is the TETIS MRV, so-called, so the tool that enables the implementation and monitoring and enforcement of both ETS and Fuel EU Maritime.
Okay, thank you. And maybe we'll be talking a little bit
more.
To be
continued, let's say.
Yes. About some of these issues later, such as the alternative fuels. But you clearly identified a number of kind of information tools. So you've got drones, you've got satellite information, so you've got more of a real-time understanding of what's happening, and therefore we can respond faster to issues or risks of pollution and others. So Lena, let me invite you to come in on this, because timely and up-to-date information, real-time information is absolutely key, as well as spatial planning tools. And how are those contributing to what we're going to see in the European Oceans Pact? Because if the first aspect of the Oceans Pact is how we affect the ocean, we need to know exactly what it is we're doing to it. And this comes into your wheelhouse at the EEA, which is mapping out these kinds of things. The experience you have of using data to provide trends, modeling, etc. What's your contribution to this?
Thanks. That's a great question. And of course, we don't yet know the details of the Ocean Pact. And hopefully this event, of course, adds to our knowledge on what is to come. But of course, data and assessments and knowledge is really key to indeed, establish the baselines and then monitor whether we are on the right way to our targets. And our agency, European Environment Agency, can play a role in supporting also the European Oceans Pact by providing the right data and assessments at the right time. By tracking ocean health, pollution, and climate impacts, we can provide insights to inform the decision making on protecting marine ecosystems and helping to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And also, you mentioned the coastal community. So, for example, also there we have, and our adaptation work is hopefully helping. We can also help with establishing the fundamental information for maritime spatial planning, which is really an important tool, by providing information on marine areas under pressure, mainly coastal areas, and protection needs of these areas. And this information then can be used by, at least to avoid decisions that could cause critical damage to the marine environment and its health. And healthy marine ecosystems are vital for all of us, and with strong data and robust assessments, good time series in monitoring can help also demonstrating how sustainability will be the core strength of the Europe's maritime future.
Okay, thank you. Maya, let me come back to you to, if you were trying to make the case about the role of maritime transport in Europe's big, ambitious Green Deal, what would you be saying? How would you make the case that actually maritime transport it's not a problem, it's the future. It is part of this, brand new space that we want to move to in the carbon transition, etc. How would you position maritime transport in that sort of bigger picture of the Green Deal?
Well, the maritime transport has already demonstrated its not just the capacity, but also readiness and willingness to support the implementation of the strategic and policy frame that has been built in Europe. And that is why I'm pretty optimistic. We have heard the words from the leading shipping sector representatives a couple of weeks ago on the European Shipping Summit in Brussels, that they are fully on board. They just need to have the predictive legal frame, which they have at the moment in the European context at least, they are seeking for the same context at the global level, given that we are talking about the global industry, and that's why the forthcoming MEPC meeting will be so pivotal and important. But what is also very important is that we really put in practice the connectivity between sustainability and competitiveness, because strategically and in not just in existing unstable geostrategic context, but generally, shipping is vital for the European economy. So it is extremely important that these two, with all the measures that would be placed and the full cooperation with the institutional and the private sector and different parts of the private sector, including banking, are on board and in full cooperation. It's not just the shipping and port sector that could drive the whole chain.
Thank you. I mean, you've raised a really interesting point, which is the role of finance, the role of banking and insurance and others, in helping to, push things in a certain direction, in providing incentives about what they insure and what they don't insure, what kind of, financing they can put in place for the capital investments that you were talking about. If we need greener infrastructure, then we need to have the financing in place. So thank you for that. Before I move on to the next part of our agenda, does anyone have a question you'd like to put? Just as a reminder that in this first section, we were looking at the new report that's just come out, looking at the environmental aspects of marine transport. We've heard some good news in areas where there's been progress. We've heard some areas that we need to make quite significant changes. The floor is open if you would like to ask a question either to Maya or to Lena. Colleagues online, I have someone here keeping an eye on the comments and the questions ready to take your input. Do you have a question that you might like to ask, or is there something you're curious about? Yes, thank you. We'll bring you a microphone. If you could just briefly introduce yourself and tell us your question.
Thank you. I'm Mr. Baruti. I'm a lawyer specialized in shipping maritime issues. And I have a question for Madame Lena relating to the environmental issue from ship or vessel coming outside Europe, bringing Chiquita banana from Latin America, bringing words from Ukraine or Russia, how the European Oceans Pact plan to check off to access the environmental standards vis-à-vis the European Oceans Pact. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, that's a good question. You've raised the point that, of course, when we say that 74% of the stuff that comes in and out of the EU travels by ship, that logically means a lot of it comes from other parts of the world. And you're inviting us to reflect on the extent to which the EU can set environmental standards on fleets that come and go from other parts of the world with very different sets of regulations and regulatory and monitoring enforcement capacity. So that's a good question. Lena.
And I think it's more a question to our Commission colleague. I mean, because indeed, our agency is not developing the Oceans Pact, but merely providing the data and assessments that support and sort of inform these types of new initiatives. But yes, of course, this is a key question. I mean, how can we still, use I think the most ecological way of transporting, but also get the green and sustainable transition really, even more forcefully forward. And how can we get the international partners, the trade partners, to also play the same with the same playbook? That's a challenge.
Maya, let me.
If I may step in, if I may step in, if you allow me.
Yes, of course.
Outside the scope of the forthcoming new European Ocean Pact, we already have in place the instruments which ensures the level playing field you are requesting. It is requested when it comes to maritime transport. And it is ensured through the implementation of, for example, port state control, which ensures the inspection of vessels against the same international standards, irrespective, they're flag neutral, irrespective of the flag the ships are flying. You have seen that ETS and fuel maritime also applies to all ships, irrespective of the flag calling at EU ports. So there are instruments which are in place, which are working, and certainly should we implement higher standards, they will be equally applicable to all ships calling at EU ports.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to, Lena, invite you to sit down because I'll bring up my next speakers and you'll still be here for our conversation. Let me invite up Isabel Rikbost, the Secretary General of the European Seaports Organization, if you could join me. And I would also like to invite Stephen Davis, Advisor for Strategic Foresight, Research and Science and Ocean Policies at DG MARE of the European Commission. So, Stephen, we already know that's a hot seat. More questions may be coming to you as we speak. But Isabel, let me start with you, because we talked about the large numbers of people moving around by ships, and then we've talked about the large amount of stuff coming in and out, and it has to go somewhere, and it goes via ports. So your community is absolutely key and crucial to that. Can you help us to understand how ports see their own role in, trying to mitigate the impact of the commercial activities that happen on air quality and habitats, and what help do ports need to try and mitigate that impact?
Yes, good evening or good afternoon, everyone, and thank you from my side as well for this nice invitation. I must say I was at the EMSA event invited by Maya, and we were recently also at the Environment Agency with our environment managers of the ports, and it was a first visit, and with Mustafa, and so I think it was a fruitful exchange. So this is already also a sign that from the port side we are really trying to do everything to be an as sustainable and livable area. But of course, and you said it, ports are and shipping lines are crucial for the economy and society. I mean, they bring goods they move goods, but also move people, and ports and shipping lines are also an important element of cohesion within Europe. So we have to keep that. At the same time, there is a lot happening in ports. Ports are hubs of energy. They are a part of the emergency supply chain. They are also playing and will play an important role in attracting clean fuels and sustainable energy, and playing a role, be it in conversion or whatever, bringing the offshore wind to the port, etc. So a lot is happening in ports. In fact, the port is a unique connection between land and sea. Not only for those who use the sea, but also probably to bring to help solutions to help in sustainability. But for instance, if you talk about waste from ships, this is treated in the ports, in the port facilities. It's brought on land in the port. So this. A lot is happening. There are a lot of stakeholders active in the port. We represent the port managing bodies. And in fact, so the port authorities, they manage the land, but ports are landlord ports. So you can, as a port authority, incentivize. You can also play, of course, we all the stakeholders in the port have to respect the policy, the European policy. But you can also set, as a port authority, certain additional rules, environmental rules, maybe put some priorities, rewarding users for doing good things. And then at the same time, you can attract, as port, solutions, attract new businesses, attract new segments, for instance, in circular economy, so avoiding waste, etc. So this you can do. When we look at air quality, we have every year as ESPO representing the European ports, we make an environmental report, which is not a quantitative report, and we have been discussing that with the agency, but more a qualitative report. But it's a lot of yes/no questions. I admit that, but we step by step. But for instance, it reveals that 7 of the 10 ports that are in this where we have the data from, and this is a bit more than 100 ports in Europe, are monitoring air quality. So they do that. Do they do it in the same way? I don't know. I'm not a technical specialist, but they monitor air quality. We have since 1993, and I must say, in fact, that our organization, the first team that ports were working on together was environment. It was the rationale behind the creation of our organization. Let's work together on environment. So, but we do also every year we ask to the ports, what are your most important environmental concerns? On which concerns are you most working? And of course, it won't come as a surprise that the last years, climate change is #1. Energy efficiency is #2, and it's a bit related in a way, and air quality #3. So ports are doing a lot. Ports are mission-driven. We are, I call it a bit hybrid, not in the sense that we use 2 fuels, but that we are at the same time commercial, and we are asked to be more commercial than before. Ports are now paying, like any economic operator, taxes, corporate tax, but at the same time we have our public missions, our public role, and this is also even increasing, so we are a bit double. So ports are having a lot of good practices. We list them on our website so that also our members can learn from each other. On air quality, we are now, our ports are now doing everything possible to abide by the AFIR, the alternative fuel regulation with having onshore power supply. It's a slow process because it's a difficult process, but I think in the next 2 years we will see a lot of additional investments, a lot of systems going in operation. As concerns habitat, for instance, because that was also a question, ports have learned to work with the Habitat Directive. And it's maybe a bit strange to say, but ports and habitats, they share the same space. Ports, and you cannot choose for that. You cannot put ports in an ugly space somewhere, whatever. Ports are at the seaside, and the seaside, it's often very nicely protected areas with nice biodiversity, etc. So what we need to do is to learn to live with that, to really respect this Habitat Directive, create compensation areas. We also give every year a prize, an ESPO award, to a port that is doing a good project or is exceeding in a good way on a specific subject. We have done it on nature in ports, and it's quite, I think you can see it on our website, all the submissions we received. It's quite amazing to see how ports have been developing nature areas among the port areas and trying to create a healthy mix of the two. And it's a bit because we are talking a lot about going to net zero pollution. And I think in the past, in the Middle Ages, ports and cities were very close to each other. It's where we learned it at school. It's where the cities started, near the sea, and where the economic activity, but it was very mixed. Then we were a bit away, and we are a bit away from each other because it's all very big installations and infrastructure. But I think if we can work towards net zero pollution ports, maybe we can come again closer to each other, and you can mix city areas, port areas, because I think it's maybe nice to have this mixture also for the people in the city to understand this is a motor, a growth engine for our society. We need the ports, but also they operate in a respectful way. And I think the image of the dirty port, it's already a bit away. I may say we are not yet there, but a lot is happening, but the carbon footprint of the port, we try to work on that.
Thank you. I mean, can you give us a couple of concrete examples? You said that you have this award that you give every year, and you can see that ports are making real differences. They are, increasingly involved in supporting renewable energy, bringing offshore wind and others onshore, etc. Can you give me, a couple of concrete examples to say, look, here we've got this port that's really transforming itself and positioning itself not just as a sort of passive receiver of goods that comes in and out, but actually saying we will be at the forefront of the transition?
I represent all the ports, and I don't know if we have ports in the audience. So if I now give examples of 4 or 5 ports, then I might skip a jealous one who says, "Why didn't you mention me?" So I would say, in fact, that they're all, for instance, we talk now a lot about clean fuels, about energy transition. I think it's the big debate. And there, what is the role of ports? What can they do? Because if we talk about clean fuels, clean technologies, energy transition, we have to make the distinction between the clean fuels and the greening of shipping, and then the role of ports as energy hubs, where they provide or help providing energies for the economy and the society. If we talk about the greening of shipping, we work, of course, on onshore power supply, and there is a role for ports, port terminals. This is a bit to be seen. It's a huge investment for the ports, enormous. Luckily, we can count on funding at the moment, and we hope this remains because it's needed. It's really not a business case. But at the same time, we want also to, because we know that the shipping companies, they will have at some point, now they can still work on transition fuels, and doing that they can cope with the decarbonization limits they have to respect in Fuel EU. But over time they will have to go to new fuels. We don't know what the new fuels will be. What can we do as ports is see that we are ready as ports, and what is ready as ports, that we see what is needed, how do you do safe bunkering, where a certain fuel can be bunkered, where not, because if we talk about ammonia, for instance, it won't be possible to use it everywhere in the port. It won't be possible for every segment, because that is also something to take into account. You have different fuels, you have different ports, and you have different segments of shipping. So there is not one solution. But it's our conviction that the demand will steer the supply. The fuel companies, they have to go to reduce their emissions. They are exploring the different possibilities. It's true, it's a bit a challenging time where you see each time you talk to someone, he has another idea, not another idea, there are not 1,000 solutions, but it's a bit looking, price is very important for the shipping lines. These are economic operators. So we think we have to incentivize the demand, and as ports, we have to see that we are there. The legislative or the legal, I would say, because the local situation has to be framed, the protocols have to be ready. We can also, in our matchmaking role, bring together fuel suppliers, fuel producers, shipping lines, and ports, and try to put this all together, do trials, etc. But the investment decision will have to come from, pushed by the shipping lines on the fuel suppliers to say, now we see that there is a real demand in this port or in this area for this fuel, so we will invest. But probably to the price element, we will need some help. We will also have money from the ETS Innovation Fund. And there, I think it's very important it's used for the sector. So financing will be very important. Then the other hand is the ports as energy hubs. And there, it's also different ports will play different roles, because of course we have here like the big area ports here at the North Sea, Port of Rotterdam, Port of Antwerp, Bruges, who are like also very vast industrial zones, and where they look for solutions to play a role, to have really, you have everything together and see that you can also stimulate there the provision, the transport of new fuels, etc. So, but in a nutshell, it will be different, but ports are looking into the opportunities. But then again, ports will need space. And this is also something, if it's not the most important challenge, I think, of ports nowadays, it's to have the space. Because we will need more space than we have needed in the past, because new energies require more space than fossil energies. I mean, forget about fossil in the future, but if there is the only advantage of fossil, it needed less space.
Very little space. Okay, thank you, Isabel. Stephen, let me come to you, because of course you and your colleagues are sort of hard at work developing the European Oceans Pact. Can you give us some sense of the sort of big picture, the broader aspects of the Ocean Pact in relation to maritime transport?
Thank you very much, Tamsin, and thank you for the welcome and for hosting this very timely event. And thanks also to those joining in person and online. I'm happy to see that you are also interested in the European Ocean Pact. Just a little point of pedantry now, we refer to it as ocean rather than oceans. Okay. Those involved in that discussion say there's only one ocean, so we've got agreement to use the singular for this. I say that in passing. But today's event, it's a good follow-up to the launch event which Lena mentioned in February in Lisbon. And at that launch event, you had quite unusually, but I think that shows the interest at political level. There were welcome messages from not one, but 3 commissioners. So from Commissioner Gigi Costas, Commissioner Roswell, and of course my Commissioner Costas Cadiz. And it is in fact Commissioner Cadiz who's been asked to steer the development of the European Ocean Pact along with his fellow commissioners. And that's also another aspect, and you very well picked it up, Tamsin, that it's not only sort of a single Director General approach, but it's really a cross-cutting approach that we have to have and that we are developing for the European Ocean Pact. And I can explain a little bit more in detail later on there. Just to remind you, the European Ocean Pact was announced by President von der Leyen in her political guidelines with a focus on boosting the blue economy in all its dimensions, including maritime transport, also ensuring good governance and sustainability of the ocean, again, in all its dimensions. And what are the headline ambitions for the Pact? I think I can summarize these in the following 3 points. So we want it to be a bold, new commitment to the ocean that places coherence, integration, and collaboration at the heart of the governance. The second point I would add is it should reaffirm the strategic importance of the ocean to Europe's competitiveness, to our resilience, and to our security. You are no doubt aware, you just need to look at the media, how these issues are being attacked at this point in time in Europe. And it should also ensure that we manage our seas sustainably, responsibly, and in the interest of future generations as well. So our future generations will have an ocean knowledge a healthy ocean to work with and live with. And I pick up a point that Lena made about on ocean knowledge. Ocean knowledge actually is crucial. It will underpin how we are going to implement the Pact. And when working towards these ambitions, we should perhaps not forget that the European Union is an ocean union. There is oft quoted statistics that some 40% more or less of the EU population lives within 50 kilometers of the coastline in Europe. So we are an ocean union. The ocean has shaped our past, it sustains our present, and will certainly define our future. It gives us food, energy, security, it fuels our trade, it connects our nations, and inspires our culture. But, as also mentioned, there is increasing competition for sea space, not only in coastal areas, but actually at sea itself. The classic example there is between fishers and offshore renewable energies. And of course, maritime transport, ships, ports, the maritime industry are key elements of this story. Again, as Tamsin mentioned, maritime transport is the cornerstone of our global trade, and carrying over 2/3 of our internal freight, for example, within the EU. And we need this sector, again, as part of the more broader blue economy sector, to remain resilient. And this is, again, more crucial than ever. Now we navigate an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. Has to be sustainable. It was mentioned before about having sustainable and responsible tourism practices. Zizi Kostas, for example, mentioned in his speech at EMSA about the role of cruise ships and that being sustainable. And it has to be innovative, to reduce fossil fuel consumption, thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions, to tackle water and air pollution, and indeed marine pollution as well. So whilst minimizing the environmental impact of this sector, we also have to safeguard the ocean, again, for our future generations. And here the Pact we see can have an important role here. In fact, from the many discussions that we've had with our stakeholders, which shows a huge interest, which we very much appreciated from across all stakeholders, one thing that has come out is the need to strengthen our EU maritime industrial base, and in particular to look at EU ports and the role of EU ports. Thank you, Tamsin.
Thank you, Stephen. And in a moment, I'm going to open the floor so you can think about any question you might like to ask. But Stephen, while I have you in the hot seat, you did very lightly refer to the geopolitical tensions that we have at the moment, many of which are playing out over our oceans. Let me get you to give us a little bit of sense that there is also a very strong priority that Europe's future security is to have strategic autonomy. We don't want to have these long supply chains. We want to have much greater intra-EU manufacturing processes, and that. So, what's the impact that you see for shipping in that? Because maybe we're going to have less shipping of stuff from outside the EU, but much more within it. How do you see this, very tense issue of safety at sea, and some of the the trade issues around that, and the fact that we've decided very clearly that for Europe's security, we need to make more stuff, particularly in critical industries within Europe?
No, thank you for that question. A few points there, if I may. Yes, Europe, in a way, is being forced to be more strategically autonomous. You see this in the debate on defence that's going on at the moment. But also, the EU, I would say, is a beacon of global trade. We want to trade with the rest of the world. It is to mutual benefit to do that. Recently, the agreement that was finally signed off with Mercosur, for example. So we see many advantages. We don't want, unlike perhaps some other parts of the world, we don't want to cut Europe off from the rest of the world. So the Pact, and in fact, the Pact is building up to be presented at the United Nations Ocean Conference, where we want to show what can be done, that Europe can, in a way, set the standard or show the way forward and how things can be done. For example, in the Green Deal, again, the Green Deal has been much criticized in certain quarters, but we can show how it can be done and how actually it can improve Europe's competitiveness and our security and our resilience as well.
Thank you. Let me open the floor now for reflections and comments. I've got lots of hands going up. That's always a great moment. And I'm also keeping an eye to see if our online communities. I've got 3 hands up. I'll start with this lady, and then we'll move forward, and we'll take the 3 contributions. And anyone from the panel can respond, including Lena and Maya, if they like. So please, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Imelda. Can I just sit down?
Yes, you're welcome to sit down. That's fine.
Thank you. I would like to know if the Ocean Pact will also invest in providing an emergency response hotline for any violation or breach throughout the maritime operation. My question is based on a true event that happened in 2020 during COVID, when there were several Indonesian seafarers who were working in a fishing boat within the territory of Europe. They sent an emergency SOS when they were locked up in the engine room of a fishing boat for refusing to kill a dolphin that was trapped in the fishing net of the fishing boat. So one of them was really smart to hide their phone, so they sent an SOS to a social media of a community, in the Indonesian community in Europe. At that time, I'm sure no civilian...
Sorry, we don't have time to get the whole story. Your question is, will the Oceans Pact foresee some kind of emergency response, some opportunity for people to signal a violation and for there to be a response?
True, because no civilians were prepared, let alone trained to respond to such event. And we had no place to, or no number to contact on that.
Nowhere to pass that information.
And that happened also at the port, one of the fishing port in the European territory. When the embassy tried to respond and tried to evacuate them, they were asked to sign a statement that they will not file a report. So that's the event that we don't want to happen also, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take the other 2 inputs and then we'll have a response. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for interesting panelist contribution here. My name is Wolfgang Paap. I was with the Commission before. I'm now working on global governance issues. That's why the idea of good governance on the ocean comes to my mind. What is good governance for you? ODA, good governance, we had in the Commission defined even, but on the oceans, it's the captain who is the sheriff on a boat. I myself, I was employed with the Japanese peace boat, for instance, but as well with luxury liners for a while. And there I saw really the dictatorship of the captain on the boat. Even criminal cases are known, murders are known on boats, but there's no good governance at all. Is there with the Ocean Pact some kind of idea to have more rule-based governance on boats as well, that the captains at least are educated to a certain standard of understanding the law even on the boats? And on the ports, if I may, I have a question. There is more and more discussion about Chinese ownership, or at least management of ports, starting with Piraeus, of course, which is a famous case. But more and more we see there even a geopolitical discussion here. How do you feel about this, since you mentioned the hybrid character of ports, private ownership corporations, as well as with a public mission? Thank you.
Thank you. And we had one last intervention from this lady. A microphone will come to you.
I have 2 small questions. I would like to know what is among the renewables or the coming ones, what is friendlier to the ocean, to the water? Okay, and then the second, in the EU Ocean Pact coming, is the military aspect taken into account as well, because they pollute quite a lot regularly?
Okay, thank you. So we've got some really tough questions to come forward. Isabel, the question about ports, ownership of ports is something that I think would come to you. Len, I think what will come to you is there do we have data on which renewable is friendlier for the ocean? And here we've got sort of hydro, we've got wind, onshore, offshore, underwater, lots of different things. What's the best thing for the oceans? That's a great question. Stephen, a hot issue is coming to you about the law of the sea. To what extent is that part of the governance thinking for the EU Ocean Pact? And then what's, of course, the EU is going to put forward at UN level. So maybe, Isabel, if I could start with you, perhaps, I don't know if it's the least contentious, but let me invite you to take that.
Yes, and thank you for the question. Indeed, the foreign influence in European ports seems to be a hot issue lately. And it's true that just to say, ports need investments. They need European investments, they need foreign investments, they need investors. They need a lot of investments, otherwise they couldn't do the things that they are doing today. And most of the investments are good investments. If we talk about ownership, I mean ownership of the whole port. I must say that what happened in Piraeus and the model that you have in Piraeus, this is exceptional. This has been a decision, in fact, supported by the EU, if I may say so, at some point, to pass from a public port to a complete privatization of or almost complete privatization of the port. But I don't think what we see, because we speak a lot about Chinese influence and foreign influence in ports, but what we see in different ports is that there is a stake in a terminal, but most of the time, and I think we now have a foreign direct investment screening legislation at European level, legislation that is being reviewed now to become even stricter. So all the cases are being reviewed, and I think that a majority stake in a port or in a terminal, it becomes very difficult for foreign investors. But we must also say, for us as ports, we think like be balanced on it, because most of the foreign investors are good investments. And we also must be careful that by very difficult procedures, we deter the good investors. Let us remind us that, for instance, UK are now also foreign investors at the moment. So, I mean, you know, so we just have to acknowledge that. But we are in a difficult geopolitical situation, and we agree as ports as well that we have to be cautious with what happens in ports. I mean, ports are open, have always been open entities. We had with the 9/11 ports changed from being open entities. When I was small, I could go to the ferry in my hometown, Ostend, and wave like that to the people. ISPS and what happened with the terrorist attacks has changed that. We now probably need also to look at ports in a different way still and look at protecting these strategic entities. But at the same time, we have to see that we are not closing the port and closing our economies, closing our societies, because that's maybe also what the nations that are less friendly to us would like to see. That we are closing, we are putting hurdles or too much hurdles in our economy and society.
Thank you. Stephen, let me come to you before Elena talks about, you know, can we grade renewables in what's best for the ocean? So this issue about governance, and, you know, yes, there is the law of the sea, but there's also problems of violations, and there's problems that we need to have perhaps some rebalancing, that on a ship, the captain's rule is total, and that probably made sense. And, you know, I'm sure that at the time of Captain Jack Sparrow, I mean, you know, the captain controlled it. But in an age of modern satellites and, you know, fleets that are part of, you know, global supply chains, perhaps now is a time to look at that. Stephen, what's the level of conversation happening?
Yes, thank you very much, Tamsin, and thank you for the question. Actually, your specific question of captain of a ship, I would perhaps direct more to Maya, not to offload it, but when that sort of focus there, I think it's more for EMSA to comment more on. Maybe what I would comment on is more our engagement in international forums. So let me give you some examples there. So the agreement on the biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions. This is in the process of being ratified at the moment, but my colleagues were very much involved in the overnight negotiations and discussions to ensure that the EU's point of view was well taken on board in the international agreement that was taken on board. And of course, now we're looking to how this is actually going to be implemented, and that's another big aspect where we would have to engage with our international partners as well. In our particular field as well, on illegal, unregulated and undocumented fishing, this is an international issue. And again, we have various agreements where we are working with third countries on that to try to reduce IUU fishing as well. We are involved in other regional bodies, for example, regional fisheries management authorities. We have strategic fishery partnerships agreements, which again promotes the EU values and EU approach to doing things as well. We've had less success in the WTO subsidies, but the EU is, if nothing, resilient, it's persistent, and we are always open to discussions and negotiations as well. I was rather shocked to hear about the situation of the fishers on board this ship, I have to say. But again, I think that's a safety issue, a rights issue, and I'm not meaning to pass it over to Maya, but I'm sure Maya would have perhaps some remarks on that as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So Maya, before we come to you, let me just invite Lena to respond on this issue about can we grade renewables on what's not just what's greener, but what is better for the ocean, given that diversity of environment?
It's an interesting question. Looking from and especially from the climate perspective, which is, and of course, climate change is a threat for everything, including the life in ocean. So, of course, the most purest or cleanest renewables would be, and I mean, have to say stress on the word green hydrogen and green ammonia. And of course, I mean, chemically, I mean, even green ammonia, I mean, if it goes to the wrong place, I mean, maybe an issue. And of course, in both cases, we are dealing with actually quite difficultly storaged chemicals. So there are many aspects on this. But of course, I mean, it's also important to look at the fuel consumption. And we know that, I mean, faster you want your ship to move, I mean, more it consumes fuel. So that is also an aspect. And then there are also really novel techniques, I mean, how one can use not sails perhaps anymore, but I mean, certain constructions which are so that the boats or the ships get assisted by wind. So there are also really great innovations, I think. So we may at least partially also get rid of the fuel and use the old-fashioned wind.
Thank you. Maya, in the sort of last few minutes that we have together, maybe you'd like to reflect from a sort of marine safety point of view, or how we deal with challenges within ships, on the high seas. You know, how do we make sure that the rule of law applies effectively?
Thank you for this question, but let me complement what Lena said about the alternative fuels just for a second. Here we need to find the proper balance on what type of alternatives are the most positive for the marine environment, with what is the most effective on board the vessels, because not all alternatives actually fit for the implementation of the vessel. We are now talking about almost 20 different alternatives which are seriously studied and have some projects already in place. But I believe that in the next couple of years, particularly with the concept of green corridors, there will be some sort of the natural elimination, let's put it that way, and concentration of a couple of them, which could have the most progressive implementation, both in terms of the accessibility during the whole supply chain. So during the whole, depends on the trade pattern of the vessel, but also taking into the consideration seriously the safety aspects. So this is just a reflection of what has been done. And then, of course, when we talk about the carbon neutrality, we have to take into the consideration life cycle emission from the production to the final consumer. So the renewable energy certainly is one of the options. Now coming to the issue of safety on board the vessels and the respect of rules of law. Well, as we all know, there are the provisions both in the UNCLOS, but there are very much more specific provisions in different international treaties developed in the context of the IMO. And of course, we have the regulations here in place in Europe with the standards for training and certification of seafarers on one hand side, and standards of living and working conditions on board the vessels. And I can, with a great assurance, tell that vast majority of the European seafarers, and in particular European officers, including captains or the masters, fully obeys the law. They are highly qualified, well-trained, and the example in the international arena. That has been demonstrated with a number of statistics that we are publishing, including those on the accidents investigation, for example. However, there could always be the possibility, there could always be the negative examples. There was also the question whether the role of the captain in respect of his responsibility for the safety of navigation on board the vessel should be somehow shifted to some other place. Well, since the implementation of a so-called International Safety Management Code, ISM code, there has been the division or the some sort of balance between the responsibility of the company and the responsibility of the master of the vessel and the crew. Nevertheless, on board the vessel, due to the nature of that job, due to the nature of the fact that ship is alone in the maritime domain, the responsibility will always remain on the master, unless we are talking about the autonomous ships, when, of course, we will shift the liability and the obligation from the master somewhere else.
Okay. Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our time together, and it was really a wide-ranging and really interesting debate. There's a couple of points I just want to draw out of this, which is the EU Ocean Pact is going to be, it's a big challenge. We are aware that, if a significant number of Europeans live within 50 kilometers of a sea, they're also exposed to rising sea levels as a result of climate change. We know that, the modeling that we see of the climate will change dramatically some of the currents that affect the weather across Europe. So this is a really big political issue. It's one that requires global conversations. It's possibly one of the hardest times in recent history to try and have a conversation about global collaboration with shared aims, given the current situation. So I commend the Commission for aiming for it, and I wish the best of luck to the negotiators going to the UN level, because they will need it. We talked about the role of ports and maritime transport, that they are key. They're so central to our European economy that if we are going to achieve our green targets, and whether we're going to achieve a sort of better sovereignty within Europe, and whether we're going to get closer to our climate targets, maritime transport will have to play a role. So we need to give it attention. The sector will need financial support. It will need capital behind it with some long-term thinking, but it is part of the overall picture. So thank you all. Thank you very much to our panelists, to Maya, to Lena, to Stephen, to Isabel. And I look forward to seeing you all at a future debate at Friends of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, we've finished the live stream, everyone.